Hey everyone, it's Alexi Uzas here from Exile. In this video, I'm going to take you through what film incentives are, how to use them, and why they're the secret weapon to your film financing plan. Okay, so let's dive in. Well, when it comes to financing your film independently, there is no greater weapon in your arsenal than a tax incentive. And as an independent producer, I go out of my way to make sure that we are utilizing, leveraging, maximizing tax rebates and tax incentives as much as possible, because there really is no other way as an independent producer to bring in, anywhere from 25 to 40% of your finance. There's no greater way to do that than through a tax incentive. There's no easier way to do it, and there's no faster way to do it than through an incentive, right? To go out and raise that much finance privately is difficult. To do it through distribution advances, sales agent advances is very difficult. So tax incentives are really this kind of this golden chest of finance that's just sitting there waiting for producers to utilize it. And the great thing is that many countries, and within countries, states offer tax incentives. They use these incentives in order to get productions into their state or into their country, so that you employ lots of people and so that money is spent in that local economy. So if you're outside of America, chances are your country or a country near you has an attractive tax incentive. And if you're in the States, then there are many states within there that offer tax incentives that are, like I said, there to really encourage film producers to move the production to their location and shoot there. So let's go through some quick definitions of what sits under a tax incentive, and then I'm going to take you through how to use them for your film. So firstly, tax incentives is kind of the umbrella term for tax credits and tax rebates. So that's the first thing to just keep in mind. If you ever hear a tax incentive, it's just an umbrella term for one of those two things. And it is exactly what it sounds like, right? It's an incentive for you to move your production there. So what are tax rebates, what are tax credits, and what's the difference between the two? A tax rebate, sometimes referred to as a cash rebate or an offset, is exactly what it sounds like as well. So it's a rebate, right? If you spend $1 in that location, they will give you back X percentage, right? So whatever that percentage is in that location. And the reason rebates are great is if you spend the money in that place, you will get the money back as long as you fulfill the criteria. So if you're ever looking at a location and it's a tax rebate, then in my view, that's the number one preference of a tax incentive. If you can find a tax rebate or a cash rebate, that is the number one preference as a producer. So the way that rebates work is you usually apply before you go into production. So during the financing stage, you apply for what can be referred to as like a provisional application. There's different words for it, but what you're doing is you're essentially going to the body that governs the rebate. You're giving them all the information about the film, and they're pre-qualifying you. And usually what will happen is that they will give you a certificate or some sort of letter that acknowledges that your film satisfies the criteria of that tax rebate. So what that means is at the end of production, once you submit your tax returns, the federal or state government is going to rebate that money to you. It's going to transfer the equivalent of what you're eligible for into the production account. Cash is going to be transferred to you, and then from there you'll pay back whoever has lent you that money. So that's the missing piece there, right? Because when you get approved to the end of production and to when you submit your tax returns, if there's 25 to 40% of cash that is missing, right, because it's not coming to the end, then you need that money during production. So what you would typically do is borrow that money either from a private investor, right? You can incorporate that into their deal so that they're not just putting equity into the film, they're putting in a combination of debt and equity, and that means that they're going to get some of their money back, right? They're guaranteed to get some of their money back. Or you can go to a film finance company who specialize in debt lending. And they will lend you the money, they will charge interest, they will charge fees. You use that money during production, and then once it comes back to you, once it's rebated back to you, you then pay them back. So that's a tax rebate and a kind of simple explanation of how it works, but by far the number one kind of preference as a producer. So the second one is tax credits, and within tax credits, you have transferable tax credits and non-transferable tax credits. So firstly, what is a tax credit? Well, a tax credit is essentially a credit against your tax bill. So if you're getting, let's say, a 30% tax credit, then at the end of production, again, once you go and submit your tax returns, you're going to have a credit to the value of 30% of your spend that can be applied against your tax bill. So when it's transferable, what that means is if you as a production don't actually need that tax credit, which is often the case, right? Because as a production, you will have received money and spent money, and usually that nets out, or sometimes you're operating at a loss during those periods, during production. So sometimes it's not that actually useful to have a tax credit. So a transferable tax credit will actually allow you to sell that tax credit to another business. It can be a business in any industry that's then able to take advantage of that tax credit themselves, because they might be running at a huge profit, and so they can use that tax credit to lower their tax bill. A non-transferable tax credit means exactly what it sounds like. You can't transfer that, so you have to use it yourself. And then finally, what's important to note about tax credits is some places offer tax credits, be they transferable or non-transferable. Sometimes also state that if for whatever reason you're not able to use that tax credit, then you can receive the benefit of it as a tax rebate, right? As a cash rebate. So when you're looking at tax incentives, it's really important to know and understand what you're looking at, right? Are you looking at a cash rebate or a tax rebate, or are you looking at a tax credit? And if you're looking at a tax credit, is it transferable or non-transferable? And if it's either of those two things, and you don't need to, you can't take advantage of it, or you don't need to take advantage of it as a production, can you get any of it rebated as cash? So really important to know those things, and when you're looking at a tax incentive, to identify immediately which one it is. And my view is that you should always take preference for a cash or a tax rebate. So once you have identified that, or once you really understand that terminology, then what I do when I'm assessing tax incentives is apply who, what, where, when, how instead of why. So I'll take you through that. So the first one is who. So who is actually eligible for this tax incentive, right? Always, like each tax incentive, and I'm going to use the umbrella term now, each tax incentive has its own set of eligibility criteria. So it could be things like, there might be a minimum budget level. There may need to be a certain percentage of crew from that location, or above the line from that location. There's all sorts of different criteria that each place applies. And so your first job is to actually identify whether your film is eligible for the tax incentive. The next thing to work out is what. So is it a tax rebate or a tax credit? Really understand the mechanism that's behind the tax incentive, and if it's something that you believe as a production is going to give you the benefit that you need. So that's really important to work out, to go through the details. And what's handy or something that I suggest at this point is you can always reach out to the film commission. So reach out to that local film commission that actually administers that tax incentive. And if you need any clarification on how it works, speak with them, organize a call with them. I've found in my experience that those officers or commissions are extremely helpful, and the people that work there are extremely helpful. So I recommend you jump on the phone. Who, what, where? So next one is where. So you want to work out where this tax incentive is, right? What's the state or what's the country? And then as a producer, as part of the budgeting process, what you need to work out is, okay, if I need to travel to this location, what is the additional costs that I'm going to incur through travel, through taking particular cast or particular crew to that location? And is that cost outweighed by the benefit of receiving the tax incentive, right? Be it the rebate or the credit. So you really need to work two budgets and two finance models. You need to have the model that applies potentially in your home country or state, maybe where there's no tax incentive or a smaller tax incentive, versus other location that you're looking at. And the only way to really identify whether it's worth going is to go through that process, create the whole budget, the whole finance plan for both of those models, look at them and decide whether it's actually worth moving the production. Okay, so that's who, what, where, then when. So next thing that you need to do is work out when you need to apply, because again, every tax incentive has different rules. So you need to look at how early on you need to apply, or maybe it's actually how close to the start of production you need to apply. And part of that is also going to be what are the materials that you need to apply. You know, you're going to potentially need to show a level of finance to apply. Now that's not always the case, right? But there are certain states I know in America where that is, right? They want to know that you already have some of that finance in place before you're even applying. In many other countries, that's not the case. So you've got to go through, work out what the timeline looks like, how that fits into your financing timeline, and how that fits into your overall timeline for production. And then finally is how. So the last thing that you want to decide is how you're going to structure the tax incentive in your finance plan. So like I mentioned earlier, you could simply go to a finance company and borrow that money and have it cash flowed into production and then pay that finance company back at the end. And that's a really simple, clean, fast way of doing it, right? Those companies specialize in it. It's a relatively seamless and pain-free experience, provided that you have the rest of the finance in place. The other option is to go to a private investor and ask them to lend the money, maybe at a lower interest rate and without the fees that a finance company are going to charge you. And then another option is to look at the amount of equity that you have in a project. You could add the debt piece on top of that and then try and raise that total figure and offer the people, those private investors, that X amount of that is going to be returned through the tax incentive and the rest of it will be equity. So they're essentially buying equity and debt in the project. And that can be an interesting way to do it, because then for an investor, they're actually guaranteed a certain level of return on their investment, right? But the total pool that you have to raise is bigger. So that's what you have to think about, right? Are you going to be able to raise that bigger amount that includes the tax incentive? You're going to be able to raise that as part of your finance raise. Or are you only going to be able to hit a lower level of private equity, and then it's easier for you to simply go to a film finance company and borrow that debt piece? So that's tax incentives in a hopefully as simple and kind of clear and succinct way of explaining it. Now, it is something that it's going to take potentially a while for you to really fully understand and grasp if you've never come across this. And for me, the way that I really understood this was basically creating finance plans, right? for the films that I was working on. So incorporating these tax incentives into finance plans and really just going through that process of seeing how I could structure the finance with those tax incentives, and reading a lot, right? Going to those commission websites and reading through the documentation and trying to understand it more. So it's something that does take time to really kind of hone in and nail. So don't get too disheartened or frustrated if you start trying to understand it all and it doesn't make sense straight away. I can guarantee you it takes time. So that's it for this video. Now, if you need any further explanations or you want further insight into any of the points that I raised in this video, please let me know in the comment section below. And if there's anything further that you want me to elaborate on, be it about tax incentives or film finance or anything to do with independent filmmaking, let me know in the comments section below. I'd be happy to throw up a video.